Hello, Assassins. My name is Sisterly Thrower, here again with the ones who came before, to bring you an in-depth look at one of my favorite Assassin's Creed games in the franchise, Unity. We're going to be taking a look at this game some 10 plus years after its release, and we're going to take a look at it all. We're going to take a look at the vibrant, lively streets of Paris. We're going to be taking a look at the fun and exciting gameplay elements that were new to the series at the time. We're going to take a look at all of this and more today. Buggy's state of the game at launch, and what should have been a very vibrant and robust co-op offering. We're going to take a look at all of this and more today, and I hope you enjoy it. Please be aware of a couple of things. This is just my take on it. Having played the game multiple times over these past 10 years, and having been a long-standing fan of the franchise, these are my thoughts. Even though it's been 10 years, I understand that some people may not have played the game. So, an in-depth look like this will involve spoilers. Please be aware, but let's get into it. Now, the first element we're going to take a look at is the story and the characters. One of the things that made this game compelling for me was the relationship between Arno and his father. Now, I know technically the two of them were only alive together for a small portion of the game, but one of the things I loved seeing in this game was the ability to watch Arno follow in his father's footsteps. To see the same journey that his father took, and to see him take on the same mantle, the same idealism, and the same set of beliefs as the Assassins, was really compelling to watch. Arno got to take a look at what his father believed in, but at the same time, he got to put his own spin on it through his own beliefs and his own values. And seeing that reverence that he had for what his father believed was something I really enjoyed. Now, of course, any discussion of the characters of Assassin's Creed Unity can't proceed without at least some discussion on the topic of Elise. And this was one area where I feel like the narrative, again, did really, really good. This wasn't a situation where the romantic interplay between Arno and Elise was forced or just beat you over the head with it. He was allowed to progress naturally. The snippets of watching Arno and Elise as children, and then watching them become young adults, friendship becoming courtship, becoming romantic interest in each other, felt like a very natural progression. And to see the two of them discover the opposing viewpoints that they had between him being an assassin and her being a Templar raised a lot of interesting questions. Was their love going to be enough to overlook this difference in viewpoints? How much did they really care about being able to bridge the gap between the Assassins and the Templars? And was their love going to be enough to put an end to the conflict between the two? This was really compelling to me. This was what propelled me forward in wanting to play this game, because I wanted answers to those questions. I wanted to see the two of them succeed as a couple and in their goals for both each other, for their city, and for their respective groups. Taking on one hand Arno's relationship with his father, and taking on the other hand his relationship with Elise, also provided some interesting points for me. Arno obviously felt very compelled to follow in his father's footsteps, but another major part of his life, his romantic interest, represented an alternative direction. What would his father have said about learning that his love, Elise, was one of the Templars that they had been fighting against? Watching Arno navigate the relationship between these two parts of his life was also really fascinating to watch, and it made the game that much more enjoyable. Now, even beyond the main characters of this entry, I also found a lot really compelling to watch in the side characters of Assassin's Creed Unity. Let's talk for a second about Francois de la Serre. He was one I always found fascinating, even from my first playthrough in this game. Did he know about Arno's father's history? Why didn't he try to make Arno a Templar? These questions kept ringing through my head, and this compelled me to play the game and want to discover more about this world, because there wasn't absolutism. There was enough question and enough mystery here to say, okay, what's really behind all this? That's what makes a game compelling to me, and that's what made Assassin's Creed Unity partly what I wanted to play so much back when it first released, and even again now. Now let's take a second, of course, to recognize one of the biggest twists in the game: the events of Mirabeau and Pierre Belec. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't see the twist coming when I first played through this game. But once I did see it, once I did play through it, as sad as it was to see the events play out the way they did, a part of me is glad that it happened the way it did, because it made for such a compelling narrative for me as a player. One of the things that I've never enjoyed about really any media, whether it's games, books, movies, TV shows, were the idyllic, perfect Superman type characters that never do anything wrong. They're always right and they always know what to do. Those never really worked for me. They never really spoke to me. But we don't have that here. While I'm sure it may have been compelling for Ubisoft to write the assassins in such a way that they were the perfect angels, they were the Superman characters, they were the we're always on the side of good and we always know what's right to do, I'm glad they didn't. Because that's not what they are here. They're just a group of people who believe in a certain set of ideals. They're trying to survive in their world. They're trying to fight for what they believe in. And it's that ambiguity, that shades of gray type of thinking that made me identify with these characters even more. That made the game that much more fun to play. And that's what we're here for in the end, right? It's fun and an interesting storyline that we can identify with. And that big twist, like I said, as sad as it was, made the game really fascinating for me. I wanted to take a second as well to address the idea of antagonists in Assassin's Creed Unity. I want to be as objective here as I can, calling balls and strikes as I see them. And I have to be honest, I was never hugely impressed with the antagonists of Assassin's Creed Unity. And I see two, beyond the issues with Pierre and the falling out with the assassins, I see two real antagonists. Credit where credit is due. Starting the game, I don't know if everybody remembers this, but starting the game with that little introductory sequence covering 13th century Templar Grandmaster Jacques de Molay and the assault on de Molay's fortress, that I thought was really cool. To watch Jacques de Molay give his most trusted knight the Sword of Eden, telling him to hide it underneath the temple where it would lay dormant for 500 years. That was a really interesting sequence, and a great way to start the game. I will grant them that. When it came to Unity's antagonists, Francois Thomas Germain, I struggled to see him as a good antagonist. And that's not to say that they wrote the character poorly, because in the times that we did see him, I didn't have any real issues with how he was portrayed. My critical issue with him was that we just didn't really see him that often. Aside from being identified as, the head of the Templars and someone that we're fighting against, which is all well and good, there was never until too late any sort of inciting incidents that I was meant to identify as a player that said, oh, this thing over here, I saw him do this, and that's why I really identify with the idea that I have to go take that guy down. We got an event, but for me it was too late in the game. For me, that event was really the very tail end of the main game. In that critical fight for the Sword of Eden, the fight that ultimately cost Elise her life, that loss of Arno's love was the event that made me say, okay, yeah, I feel this now. I feel this in my heart. I feel this in my gut. We got to take this guy down. But so quickly after that, we did. At the end of that fight, we see Germain is weakened. Arno walks up to him, stabs him in the throat with his hidden blade, and just like that, it's over. There are two elements of gameplay that I wanted to highlight as part of why I love Assassin's Creed Unity as much as I do. We'll start with the smallest one first. Free running. Now, of course, parkour has been an element of Assassin's Creed as a whole since the game's inception. But I always found myself with a critical issue. You climb up to the top of the tall tower and looking down over the city, you've gotten the synchronization point. How in the blue blazes am I supposed to get down off this building? With the sync point towers, yes, there was always a free fall item underneath. For every other building that, say, didn't have a leap of faith safety item at the bottom, what were you supposed to do? You could fall and then try to grab ledges on your way down, or you could be like me, quite frankly, who would just yeet myself off of every rooftop, and if I died and respawned at the bottom, then so be it. It was still going to be faster than ledge grabbing on the way down, and I will die on that hill. That was the state of parkour pre-Unity. And I love the answer that Unity came up with. So simplistic, but so powerful, the idea of a free run down mechanic. I thought the parkour was pretty smooth. I know it had its kinks here and there, but both free running up and down was honestly one of the smoothest parts of the game, in my opinion. And the idea of being able to free run down, of being able to simplify that idea of, okay, how do I get from a rooftop to the ground level, it worked for me. It felt smooth. It felt nice. The feel of the controller in my hand, just everything clicked for me. And I will always love what it did, both for Unity itself and for the future of Assassin's Creed parkour. The second element we're going to talk about is the freedom in Assassin's Creed Unity assassinations in their black box missions. Now, you could technically argue that to an extent you've had some degree of freedom in previous Assassin's Creed games when it came to assassinations. Do I aerial assassinate this guy from the top of the roof, or do I, come up behind him on the ground? Sure, I will hear you on that to an extent, but I always felt relatively penned in. You always were stuck in a sort of one way forward approach of thinking that said, okay, you have to go here through this particular narrative mechanic, and you're going to sneak in through this building here through this particular narrative mechanic, which was good, and I understand that Assassin's Creed had to be built up from a foundation. But the freedom in the assassinations of those black box missions in Unity just was revolutionary to me at the time. Just the freedom of being put on top of a building and say, okay, your guy is about 3 city blocks that way, and there might be something over here that can help you sneak in and get into this building here, but you don't know exactly what it is. Oh, but there's also a possible structural weakness in the building over there. You could go explore that too. Or you could say, you know what? Forget it all. I'm gonna sprint in there full speed, screaming at the top of my lungs, waving my sword around, and hope for the best. That freedom of choice is something I've always loved as a player, and it always made more sense to me in the context of Assassin's Creed. It made me feel like I was making the choices. It made me feel like I was the one in control of the assassination, how it went, whether or not it was successful. And that ownership of choice made the game all the more fun for me as a player. Another new part of gameplay offered in Assassin's Creed Unity that I wanted to make sure I mentioned as well was the idea of character customization. Now sure, in previous Assassin's Creed games, they did let you choose outfits, and a lot of those outfits you could dye in different colors, and that was great. But Unity took it a step farther and said, okay, what exactly do you want your belt to look like, your hood to look like? What weapon do you want to carry on you? Do you want to have the big imposing axe on your back? Do you want to have the sleek looking saber by your hip? I got to control all of that, and I got to create my own personalized look for how I wanted my assassin to appear to others in the world. I really enjoyed that. I know it's a smaller detail in the grand scheme of how the game played, and I get that, but just the look overall really meant a lot to me. While I know previous Assassin's Creed titles had offered a fair amount in terms of PvP multiplayer, I like to think that most of us, if not all of us, had that question running in the back of our minds that said, wouldn't it be just fun if I could run around with my friends, loot chests, and break into buildings, and go on assassination missions, just being badasses together? The combination of thieving missions and assassination missions in Unity always left me with something to do. But the way the missions were structured was ultimately my favorite part. And here's why. There were missions, maybe not necessarily all of them, but there were a lot of missions where you quite literally had to rely on your fellow players. As in, it was impossible to get these objectives done together cleanly. You may have been able to fudge it around the edges, but to really be assassins, to really work in the shadows, you had to rely on your partners. Maybe a nosy guard happened to catch a glimpse of you running around a corner and you had to hide and the mission was at risk, and there you are hiding around the corner thinking, oh, here it is, it's all about to kick off now, but then, oh, your friend saved you. The mission's back on. That feeling, just beautiful. The pushback that I always get when I talk about how much I enjoyed the Assassin's Creed Unity co-op was the buggy, crashy nature of the game upon its release. And let me be clear, I don't want to downplay that. I, as a gamer, am just as upset as anybody else when I pay good money for what feels like an unfinished product. But at the same time, I don't want us to get too lost in the weeds and just completely ignore the gift that was given to us about what a unique take Unity was. The game was literally built on the idea of working together in a way that no other game had seen, and they pushed that in every angle. There was the emphasis on teamwork in the CG trailers. There were 4 assassins on the game's cover. The game was literally called Unity. And I always appreciated what they were trying to do, even if they didn't do it perfectly at first. The Dead Kings DLC for me as an individual player was really interesting to play. From the perspective of understanding what messages regarding our mental health can we find in video games. Arno's journey, having lost Elise, was going to be difficult no matter what. But I think the narrative of the Dead Kings DLC did a really good job of showing what healthy grieving looks like. How do you find a purpose for your life after the loss of a loved one? Now, while Arno may have been more rediscovering his purpose as an assassin, it was still an interesting example of what we can all look at in healthy mental health practice. And I think that's valuable that the game was able to show us that in such a vibrant and engaging way. But one touch that I will always remember, just right off the bat, is at the start of the Dead Kings DLC, when Arno is at the height of his grief. I remember distinctly playing, and even watching it back later, that Franciade as a setting seems very gray overall. There's not really any music, there's not really any ambient noise. It's just such a dull world overall. But as Arno starts to move through his grief, as he starts to rediscover his purpose as an assassin, you start to hear the music come back. You start to hear the people on the streets walking around, overhearing their conversation, and the color scheme overall just gets just a little bit brighter. And I appreciate that as a nice narrative touch. The setting of Franciade overall, it makes for an interesting comparison between Paris and Franciade. Understanding that this was in the time, the streets of Paris were fairly modernized. The colors were very vibrant, buildings, the structures, everything looked like what was a modernized city at that time, of course. Franciade, a little podunk town in the French Highlands, looked like it was stuck in the medieval setting. It felt grittier, it felt more in your face and a bit more harsh. And I like that contrast, especially given the overall narrative of this is where Arno is going to really express and really experience his grief at losing his love. For me, playing through that, I have to note as well, part of what helped me through that grief was the guillotine gun. I'm sorry, it's like the perfect combination of a weapon, a mortar. It felt so good, and credit where credit is due. I think Ubisoft did a really good job of programming that gun. I really liked how it felt, I really liked its utility, and I think it was just another little cherry on top that made the Dead Kings DLC that much nicer. For all the elements we've discussed here today, I will forever view Assassin's Creed Unity as a flashpoint of change for the universe overall. We went from some fairly linear games and some fairly flat characters to open worlds, compelling characters, and fascinating storylines that got us as players thinking about loyalty, love, life's purpose, and the influence of family history on our future life's direction. We got a degree of freedom in this game that we had never had before. How we chose to be an assassin, from the approach we took to the weapons we used, to the robes we wore, and so much more. This game brought us one of the most ambitious and iconic open worlds to date, built on new technology, which allowed for an immersive, graphically and visually stunning take on revolutionary Paris. And it was this setting that served as a brilliant backdrop, both for the variety of activities that we got to partake in, for the wonderful locations that we got to see and be a part of, and what I will always argue is one of the most compelling narratives AC has yet produced. The Assassin's Creed fanbase and community has gone through some really interesting shifts when it comes to their viewpoints on this game overall. To me, it says something that even years later, people are starting to and have been for a while now arguing about the value of this game in its place amongst the other titles in the franchise. Now, like I said, I don't blame people for being upset about the buggy and sometimes unplayable nature of the game when it was first released. We had a right to be upset about that, and I don't fault anyone for being upset. But I have to give credit where credit is due, that they continued to try to fix the world, to eventually give us a game that was immersive and engaging in a way that Assassin's Creed had never been able to tackle before. Alright everybody, this sums it up for my thoughts on Assassin's Creed Unity. A great game with something of a bad reputation, with the rushed nature of the launch that eventually got to the state where it was a smooth, enjoyable, fun experience overall. Please let me know down in the comments below. What are your thoughts on Assassin's Creed Unity? What did it do well? What could it have done better on? Let's get the conversation going down in the comments below. As always, this has been Sisterly Thrower with the ones who came before. Thank you all so much for watching, and always remember, work in the dark to serve the light.